If you clicked on this video expecting MatPat, then you, my friend, are a numbskull. Cue the bad intro! Dun, 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 dun. Boom, boom. Hello, Internet, and welcome to Gale Theory, the totally original show where I try to figure out the lore of some of the Internet's most beloved games, and all without a Diet Coke. Today, we'll be looking at a game that took only 24 hours to take the World Wide Web by storm, Deltarune. Deltarune is a demo for a theoretical game Toby Fox might make in the future that involves the beloved characters from his other game you might have heard of, Undertale. It's weird, it's incomplete, but it has the same charm and feelings that fans have come to associate with Undertale, and clearly, that is enough to get people excited. But I'm not going to be talking or theorizing about where this game fits with the general Undertale canon because, well, Toby himself has said that this game is basically an alternate universe. Quote, "I will say that basically what you're seeing here is not the world of Undertale. Undertale's world and ending are the same as however you left them. To rephrase that, Deltarune's world is a different one, with different characters that have lived different lives. A whole new story will happen." End quote. No, what I really want to talk about is not where Deltarune is, but what Deltarune is. You see, I'm a big fan of Undertale, and my favorite part about that game was the story. But not the main story of Frisk and friends, but the hidden backstory about why the Underground is in the state that it is. I'm talking about Chara and Asriel. Learning about these two characters, who they were, what they did, what they became, really changes how you view that game, and more importantly, how you view your choices. Everyone else is an important character, yes, but these two are the basis for why what you do has meaning. Without them, there is no way to break the barrier, there is no tension between monsters and humans, and there is no happy ending. But why mention Undertale and Chara and Asriel when this isn't Undertale? It's Deltarune, a completely separate world and story. And fair point made, theoretical viewer. I wanted to bring them up because I have an idea that they serve the exact same purpose in this game. Deltarune isn't the story of you, the player. Deltarune is the story of Asriel and Chara, better known as Kris. The first thing to talk about is the lack of choice in this game. It's very clear from the opening segment of the game that your choices don't matter, and if that subtle line of no one can choose who they are in this world doesn't clue you in, Susie will, directly stating, if you haven't gotten it by now, your choices don't matter. Undertale was a game designed entirely around choice, being the RPG where no one has to die. But Deltarune is different. You have no choice. The events that are about to transpire will happen regardless of how you play. No one can be killed, and no one can be saved. But that's how nearly every other game ever made plays, so why does that mean anything? Isn't it just a statement that this isn't Undertale? And I thought so too. But it kept bugging me as more odd details came up. One of the first things you see in the game proper is Kris's bedroom, one that they share with their brother Asriel. A human child that's an adopted sibling of Asriel? Where have I seen that before? And that's sure. But what's really of note here is the difference between the two sides of the room. Asriel's is clean, filled with trophies, awards, music, personality. Kris's side, on the other hand, is totally bare. The shelves are empty and scuffed up. There is no indication of any of their likes or hobbies, only a red wagon and a rusty birdcage, which is pretty odd as far as kids' toys go. When you reach school, you quickly learn that Kris isn't hated by the kids in their class, but is considered, well, for lack of a better term, stupid. Some classmates pick other friends for the project, yes, but one picks an egg, and the other is so repulsed at the idea of Kris being in his group that he purposely sabotages Noelle's attempts to have a group of 3. Kris is then overpowered by Susie outside, with the only reason she's still alive apparently being because Susie doesn't want to upset Toriel. It is apparent 15 minutes into the game that Kris Well, Kris isn't really what one would consider popular, and the end walk through town only supports that, as everyone around you talks about how weird Kris is and how amazing Asriel was. Kris hid under the bed and scared Noelle. Kris only went to church to drink the fruit juice. Kris never went to the hospital to visit a sick family friend without Toriel or Asgore making them. But Asriel was a great singer in the church choir. Asriel was best friends with a lot of the characters around town, driving together, going to dances, even kissing one. And Asriel is in college right now with his good grades. Everything Kris is not, Asriel is. And then it all culminates into the oddest scene of all, the last one. Kris wakes up in the middle of the night, shuffles over to a strange wagon and bird cage and literally rips their heart out and locks it up before brandishing a knife and revealing their red eyes for the first time. And to an Undertale fan, this is very similar to another ending of another Toby Fox game. And it makes no sense at first. Why now? Why throw your soul into a cage? Why, after you just made your first friends? And then someone brought up something incredible that put the whole thing together for me. During the last scene, you can still move the soul. Deltarune isn't the story of you, the player. It's about Kris. The distinction here is that you are not Kris. You are the soul, the red heart. Kris can function without you. Kris has functioned without you. In the ending, Kris throws you away and is moving, planning, and existing without you. And this explains everything. When you play as Kris on the surface, people respond to you differently. They talk to Kris like they haven't talked to them in ages. Exposition about Asriel from shopkeepers. Undyne just now learning who you are. Mr. Holiday wondering why you've decided to visit him. They mention this not because it's a game and they have to provide some context, though that is certainly part of it. No, they talk like that because while you, the player, are curious about the world and seeing all the past monster friends from your experience in Undertale, Kris wasn't. Kris didn't care about these monsters. Kris followed their brother around town, and when he left, they had no more reason to try to socialize. You are making Kris act out of character, and so the monsters around town act accordingly. Toriel is even surprised to hear you say that you hung out with a friend, something basic most kids would do. You even have strange reactions to things Kris has done in the past. Namely, you don't recognize a get well card that Kris signed, and you can't play a piano, but Kris can. They're small details, but they're details that show that before Deltarune Kris is different in skills and personality than during Deltarune Kris. This is further expanded upon when you enter the Dark World. Kris clearly hasn't been there before, judging by how they back away from the door when it opens. Kris is scared. This isn't normal for Kris. But after you fall and save for the first time, you see that Kris is no longer in control. You are. The save file changes to show your name from the opening sequence. Kris is gone, and you go on this adventure in the Dark World with Susie in their body. Until this point, you could only move forward in the story's progression. You couldn't explore the town or the school, but now you have free reign. You, the player, can go anywhere now because you have fully become Kris. And as a player, you get a traditional child adventure story. Kid with a troubled life finds a secret magical land where they are important to the future of all its magical creatures and returns home feeling accomplished and gaining skills to take on real life challenges. It's the plot of like every young adult novel ever. And you play it to completion because that is the game. In this one chapter demo, there is a full story. There is still some mysteries of who is the knight and what is Jevel's role and everything, but you've done it. You stopped the bad guy, restored the kingdom, and even made your first friends. You close the evil light portal and go home now with a promise of a better tomorrow, hanging out with Susie. The story is done. The game is over. You can go home, sleep, and boom, you're done. There should be no more game, but there is. This is only a demo. Only chapter 1 of a larger story. So here is my theory of what is really going on. The real story of Deltarune. The story of Kris. One morning, Kris wakes up like normal, unenthused, to the voice of their mother Toriel. But something is a bit off today. It's almost like they aren't in full control of their body, like something else is urging them to interact with things they normally would not care about. After flushing the toilet 9 times, they finally go to school where another unfortunate group project is required. Kris asks everyone to be their partner, even kids they know from experience will already be paired up. Kris gets bullied by the smarter kids in class for even attempting to try. Then, as poor Noelle tries to be kind, Susie, class bully, walks in late, leading to Alphys making Kris and Susie retrieve chalk from the supply closet. Outside the classroom, Kris watches Susie eat the chalk. Even though they say nothing, even though they do nothing, Susie attacks. They can't defend themselves as Susie picks them up and slams them into the lockers. Kris has no choice. Kris never gets a choice. But then Kris steps into a dark supply closet and falls into a strange land made of cards and toys, things that exist only to be used and played with by another, and in this case, only exist to be used by Kris. Kris feels something new inside them, a soul, a player. A soul that means in this world they are powerful. They can defeat anyone with both brains and brawn. They are strong and can cut down enemies. They are clever and can lead their party members to victory. They are even well-liked enough to flirt properly. In this world, Kris is the best at everything. Everyone wants to be friends with Kris. Everyone fears Kris. And in the end, even the king cannot defeat Kris. But then, they have to leave. And then Kris and Susie are home. Kris walks through town and feels compelled by the player to talk to all the townsfolk. They all are surprised, but are happy to talk. Talk about Asriel, that is. How great is Asriel? How wonderful was Asriel? Can you do this thing that Asriel did? I can't wait for Asriel to get home. The more Kris is forced to interact, the more this force inside them, this soul, makes them listen to all these people, the more Kris feels angry. They are the only human in a world of monsters. They are the weakest in all ways to these people. Even at home, they are the black sheep, the bad child, while their brother Asriel is good at everything. In the dark world, Kris was powerful. Kris was the best. But no one can choose who they are in this world. And in this world, Kris is nothing. They go home, and the adventure is set to end. The soul, the player, is set to leave forever. But Kris is done being weak. They've had a taste of power. They've experienced being the strongest, and they're not ready to give that up yet. So Kris wakes up before the end, forces themselves over to the wagon and rips out the soul, the player, locking them in a bird cage forever. If the player is trapped, then the game must continue. Kris gets to keep the power, and they have ideas on how to use it. In the future, I believe Asriel will have to come back. I think he'll have to face the monster he helped create. I think you as the player will be separate from Kris, but at the same time, connected. And I think that's just a theory, a Gale theory. Thanks for watching. Before I get to the end screen, there are just a few things I want to quick get out. First, I just want to say a huge thank you to the people behind Game Theory for inspiring me to make something like this. I'm just learning to edit and write scripts, so taking this episode on was quite the undertaking. But even though I spent a week making this, I've never had so much fun with a video. Also, I totally understand making 2-part episodes because there was so much more I wanted to add, but just couldn't for time and production purposes. MatPat, you and your team are incredibly talented to do this as often as you do. Second, tied with MatPat's theory, I wanted to answer some questions I feel might come up that I may not have really answered clearly. I made this after seeing the first game theory on Deltarune because while MatPat and I saw the same things, we interpreted them very differently. The Dark World for MatPat is fake and an imaginary game made by Kris. While I see why he thinks that, it's a very scientific perspective on the evidence. For me, it is something more literary in nature. I think it's the Wonderland conundrum of, did Alice actually go to Wonderland or was it all a dream? The game purposely puts evidence of both sides in the game to make it impossible to say for certain yes or no, just like the Alice in Wonderland story does, because this is clearly Alice in Wonderland, but I can't get into that right now. I feel like that isn't a part of the true story behind the whole game, but more the story behind the game that the player was supposed to play before Kris screwed it up. Third, Gaster in the bunker. To be honest, I think that is something strictly for the future chapters. Maybe that's how the group defeats or saves Kris from themselves. Maybe there's an answer to why only Kris is human. Maybe it'll be like the True Lab and just be an exposition dump from a story long past. I have no idea, so I left it out of the theory. So that's everything, and if you've stuck along to the end of this video, thank you. Have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye!